Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome in to another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you guys are off to a great work week out there, wrapping up the Super Bowl. Man, Tampa Bay, very impressive with what happened here this past weekend. That defense chasing Patrick Mahomes all around. What was it I read? Up to 500 yards. Mahomes was running around for his life there before he made some of those passes that were insane. So his baseball background certainly benefited him. Everybody going crazy about the throws he made while diving, falling backwards, and how can somebody do this? And all I thought about was, this is obviously baseball. I mean, you think about a third baseman, shortstop, making that bunt throw while they're falling down, going forward, and everybody's just so mesmerized in the football world, and that's status quo in baseball. Throwing from every arm angle, every body contortion, ground ball up the middle, got to spin and throw it to first base. So Mahomes just showing the athleticism out there, and just another reason for all you mom and dads to let your kids play multiple sports while they're growing up so they can show off impressive feats like Mahomes was able to do there. But Tom Brady gets number 7. Super impressive. Of course, the greatest of all time, in my opinion. And I think he's going to get 1, maybe 2 more before the time he's done here in the next 3 to 5 years or so. But let's jump into the baseball world here. Not a ton going down over the past 72 hours to talk about with you guys, but we do have some news articles to discuss. So we got a great show lined up for you here today. Let's jump right in. And first off, I want to talk to you guys about, apparently baseball is deadening the baseballs this year. They're making an adjustment to the ball itself due to the increase in the home run rate that has taken place over the last 2 to 3 years. Back in 2019, there were 6,776 home runs hit during the last 162-game season, which came in at a 6.6% clip of all plate appearances ending in a home run. And now the number in 2020, obviously lower over the course of 60 games, but it was still 6.5% home run rate per plate appearance. So Major League Baseball finally taking a look at it, listening to the feedback from pitchers, and ultimately making some adjustments to the baseball itself. They stem around scientific research. It basically, here the saying is coefficient of restitution, which essentially means the bounciness of the baseball. And it is regulated to be anywhere from 0.530 to 0.570. And they said over the past couple of years, it's been a heck of a lot closer to that 0.57 mark than it has been the 0.53. So how do they make this adjustment? What are they looking at? And they say the cause of this is due to the stitching of the baseball. It is, quote, inconsistency in seam height, end quote. And this is because each baseball is hand sewn down in the factory of Costa Rica, the Rawlings factory down there. So there isn't 100% standard in regards to seam height due to the human error, I guess is the best way to put it. But inconsistent seam height has led to the bounciness of the baseball. So Rawlings is working to make it closer to that 0.53 mark. And one of the ways that they are going to be able to do this is that they are loosening the first 3 wool windings of the baseball. Of course, you have the inner cork of the baseball and then the winding materials around it. So they are going to briefly loosen those first 3 wool windings, and they anticipate that this will lower the bounciness just a bit to get closer to that 0.53 mark. And they will also be adding humidifiers or humidors to 5 additional teams. There are currently 5 out of the 32 that use humidors. Everybody most notably knows the Colorado Rockies due to the altitude out there and Mile High. Well, they are extending this to 5 additional teams. Now, these teams have not been made public, so we are not sure at this time which organizations or ballparks will have these humidors, but this will also keep the ball more regulated and allow for that bounciness to get closer to that 0.53 mark. So there was an independent study done that says the new balls should fly about 2 feet shorter for every ball that is hit over 375 feet. And when I read that, I'm thinking to myself, how much is this actually going to do in regards to the results of home runs? I mean, 375 and beyond basically only takes care of the right and left center field gaps through center field. Down the lines, it's usually 325, 330, so balls hit anywhere from 330 to 360 down the line. This isn't going to affect whatsoever. It's just those longer home runs to center, right center, and left center that may go just a bit shorter. And I don't have the diagrams or the stats in front of me, but I'm not sure how many of these home runs only went into the first row that will now be off the wall because they will be 2 feet shorter. So I am certainly hesitant to say this is going to have a big impact on the home run percentage, 6.6 to 6.5. Maybe it gets down to 6.3 this year, but ultimately, I think it's good for the game of baseball. Talking to pitchers in the league, they certainly have mentioned how the ball is flying much further here recently, specifically Yankee Stadium out to right field. People are hitting pop-ups that are ending up in the seats. So it's just a storyline to watch with, of course, the launch angle revolution taking place. A lot of hitters trying for that home run swing now as opposed to, chopping wood where back in the 80s and 90s you swung down on the baseball. Now you're swinging up on the baseball to create that lift, that backspin, and it'll be interesting to see if there are any, ramifications of loosening the wool and working more so to get standardization in the seam height, and if that has any impact on the game, the amount of runs scored, and keeping the ball in the yard. So keep an eye out on that this spring training. It'll be fascinating to see if runs are down, home runs are down, or if the warm weather in Florida and Arizona will kind of keep things where the status quo is moving forward. So beyond the baseball and deadening the ball, it was also reported here in the past 48 hours or so, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, that Major League Baseball and the Players Association, they have come to an agreement on the COVID health and safety protocol for the 2021 season. And there are a few headlines that come out of this in regards to actual gameplay and how it will affect the on-the-field product. One of the most important ones being that if double headers are scheduled due to cancellations or COVID or rescheduling, these will continue to be 7-inning games like last year. So no longer double headers will be 9-inning games. They will be back to 7-inning contests in that manner. Also, each offense will start with a runner on second base in extra innings like 2020. And I got to be honest with you, when I read that rule last year, I was not a huge fan of putting the guy out on second base. But once I saw it implemented and how it helped the game continue to, end before 15, 16, 17 inning affairs, which aren't aesthetically pleasing for anybody out there because basically it turns into a home run derby and which guy can hit a home run first. This brings back kind of that old school vibe to the game in extra innings. You have the decision whether or not to bunt the runner over to third, give up an out, drive him in from third with less than 2 outs. Does the other team then walk the bases loaded to set up the double play? Or do you just hit away because you feel that one hit or being able to move the runner over on your own gives you a higher percentage of scoring or a better chance? So anything that can keep those games of 14, 15 innings out of the game of baseball, I am a fan of. And I did enjoy this much more than I thought I would last year. So I'm okay with the fact that it's coming back here for the 2021 season. The active roster will also be 26 players instead of 25, so adding an extra body to the active roster. And then in the month of September, that will increase to 28 players as opposed to the 40-player limit that it's been in years past in September, which of course increases the length of the game due to pinch hitters, having more bullpen pieces, more pitching changes. This will keep the safety down due to the numbers in the locker room, the numbers traveling. So no problem there either, keeping it at 26 to 28 for September. And then the last one here is Major League clubs will be permitted to carry up to 5 additional taxi squad players on all road trips. So there will be 5 guys essentially kind of in that quad A level, triple A major leagues, where if something happens day of game or during a 7 or 10 day road trip, they will have 5 additional bodies to be able to fill in that roster and not have to ship guys up from triple A, put them on a plane, send them across the country, and try to get them there before the game starts. So I do like all of these updates and interactions from the Players Association and Major League Baseball when it comes to the on-the-field product moving forward in 2021. There were also a bunch of rules announced for off the field in regards to travel or days off in between games. There will be a mandatory 5-day at-home quarantine period prior to spring training. So for pitchers and catchers who report here in just about a week, that will be upcoming by this weekend. They'll have to start an at-home quarantine while getting a negative PCR test in order to report to camp this year. There will be a 10-day isolation period required for individuals who test positive. So if they do have a positive test, guys will be out for at least 10 days, probably upwards of 2 weeks, until they have a negative test here. So individuals who have been identified as close contact with a confirmed case, they have to quarantine for 5 to 7 days and must have a negative test on day 5 or later in order to rejoin the club. And we've seen this across the NBA, college basketball. Hey, this guy tested positive. You were roommates with him on the road. So now you have to quarantine for 5 days at least until you get yourself a negative test. So this will keep kind of separation between teammates when it comes to hotel activities, dinners on the road, things like that. So players during road trips are also not permitted to leave the hotel for anything other than team activities or medical reasons, such as outdoor exercise, outdoor dining, low-risk outdoor activities, but they have to touch base with the club compliance officer before leaving the hotel. So there will be a guy sitting in the lobbies continuing to look to get guys in trouble. This was added in the middle of last year, talking to guys. They don't know who they are, but just random guys would sit in the lobby knowing who was on the squad, keeping an eye out for anybody leaving the hotel who would not be allowed to. And it'll be a fascinating kind of eye in the sky routine to go, hey, I got to tell the compliance officer I'm going for a jog around the block here, which I know players were not too happy about last year, but certainly found this to be helpful in continuing the season. And all the guys want to get paid, so they will be abiding by these rules here moving forward. Contact tracing will require Kinexon, Kinexon, devices to be worn at all times while in facilities, club-directed travel, workouts, practices. So basically everybody's going to have some sort of device on them that lets you know, hey, you were close to this guy during your bullpen session. He then tested positive, so you now have to do the 5-day quarantine. That's how they'll be able to do the contract tracing and keep an eye out on everything moving forward. Also, face coverings must be worn properly at all times while in the facilities and the dugout. This abides for everybody other than the players on the field during warm-ups, during the game or pregame and all of that stuff. So in the clubhouse, the locker rooms, the dugouts, you'll see face masks being worn 24/7. And then like I mentioned earlier, all clubs will have a compliance officer and a face mask enforcement officer, which could lead to fines or suspension. And fines that will be issued for non-compliance will be donated to charity. So Major League Baseball will not be benefiting from these fines or suspensions, and that's a nice little twist from baseball's side of things. If, hey, 25 grand, 50 grand because somebody's not wearing their mask, they're able to donate this money to local charities to help out with COVID relief and pandemic relief and everything along those lines. So a lot going on off the field. Essentially, again, players will be quarantined in hotels when they're on the road. They're not allowed into casinos, indoor dining, movie theaters, things that are continuing to be shut down across America but could potentially get out for a walk around the block or a bite to eat as long as they check in. And then wrapping up on the field, like we mentioned, 7-inning doubleheaders, runners on second base for extra innings, and then 5 additional taxi squad bodies available in case something goes down. So it'll be fascinating to follow here if the baseball stays in the yard more, with the coefficient of restitution being limited and closer to that 0.53 mark as opposed to 0.57, and then all the COVID protocols that teams and players have agreed to here. So interesting, no DH, no expanded playoffs, but the players in baseball were able to come together on the health and safety protocols to get this year underway and started here on time in the next coming week or so. But that'll wrap it up here for the first segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll step aside here for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows, but when we come back, we'll give you guys an update on the code of conduct with Major League Baseball, as well as talk about the signings and rumors taking place out there. So I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Stick around, everyone. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you guys haven't liked, subscribed, rate, and review the podcast, please take a moment to do that now. Wherever you're listening to this, whether it's Google Play, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Pandora, let's see here, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, all across the board. GSMC is available for you guys to listen at any point on demand. That's the beauty of podcasts. Even if you fall a week or so behind, you can still catch up to date with everything that's going on. You may know it by now, but hey, if you like, rate, subscribe, review, you'll be alerted when the latest episode is available, and you guys can stay up to date with everything Major League Baseball, because we are a week away from spring training, so things are about to get hot and heavy here as we move forward. So if you're into anything else besides baseball, type in just GSMC into that search icon. You'll be brought up to the NBA podcast, NHL, college basketball, and if it's not sports you're looking for, there's books, movies, music, news, health and fitness. There's a podcast for you. Whatever hobby you're into, whatever you're trying to improve in your life, there's great content available out there within the podcast network to bring you guys stuff to listen to as we're at home quarantining still, trying to pass the time here until ultimately we can get back to normal here later this year in 2021. But jumping into segment number 2 now, I did want to touch base on the fact that Major League Baseball has updated their code of conduct. This is in response to the 2 sexual allegations that have taken place with Jared Porter and Mickey Callaway over the past month or so. Both teams, the Mets as well as, the Angels, a couple of other are doing internal investigations on how to improve their briefing and qualifying process, trying to update the background check, figure out how they can get ahead of these things, because I mentioned it, the New York Mets being tied to both of these guys here in the past 3 to 5 years is not a good look for the Mets up there. So they're trying to improve internally, but Major League Baseball across the board is working with a third-party organization to create a hotline. This hotline is called Speak Up, and signs are going to be posted across all clubhouses, across all stadiums, with a hotline number to call anonymously to give a tip if anything like these sexual advances or, uncomfortable situations present themselves again. And this will allow females or whoever it is to make anonymous tips. And then depending on the accusation, they will either work with the commissioner's office to do an investigation or work with the individual organization to try to figure out a bit more as to what's going on in regards to the accusation. So, man, it's just fascinating that this hasn't taken place up until this point, and it takes, unfortunately, these two circumstances to come out to get a hotline involved, to give somebody an anonymous tip line to share without fear of repercussion in regards to their profession or, their career and things along those lines. So a nice step for Major League Baseball. Unfortunately, a bit too late, in my opinion. I think every league or, the NFL, NHL, NBA should have something along these lines to make female reporters feel more included and not alienated if something like this happens here moving forward. But a third-party organization creates a Speak Up hotline that will allow individuals to call in and give anonymous tips, as well as each team will be, they'll have to go through a harassment and discrimination training. People in the front office, people in the organization, higher-level executives will have to get this done here by the month of March. They will have to do an updated training so everybody within the workplace knows what is good, what is not good. And honestly, everybody should know by now. But again, making everybody go through this sort of training just to kind of cover their tails, I believe, is what Major League Baseball is looking at here. So training for all the executives, an anonymous hotline is now available to all reporters out there. So a step in the right direction, but, a little bit late here if you're Major League Baseball to the party. Another thing I wanted to hit on, you guys have probably heard out there by now, but unfortunately there was another death in the world of baseball. This one coming from Pedro Gomez, who passed away unexpectedly at the age of 58. And Pedro had worked for ESPN for upwards of 35 years covering baseball. I know I myself, he was a stalwart when it comes to coverage, watching Baseball Tonight, Sports Center, whatever it is baseball related for ESPN. Pedro was certainly very involved. Most recently, there was a connection with him and the country of Cuba and how that is related to the U.S. now. They're open and that whole organization and what happened there. So he was very much involved with that. There was no cause of death given at the time here, so not exactly sure what happened to Pedro. But again, it was unexpected at the age of 58 and certainly sad in the game of baseball because, again, he was very much involved for 3.5 decades, and I myself, when I saw that, was like, geez, man, what happened? He's not that old. What's going on here? And we weren't able to get any updates on the cause of death, but again, my condolences go out to the Gomez family. Pedro's son is involved in the Red Sox organization as a minor league pitcher, so condolences and prayers go out to him, as well as anybody else who knew Pedro and that entire family. So, another unfortunate situation taking place here, but rest in peace, Pedro. Thank you for everything you did for the game of baseball. I know I enjoyed your coverage watching you. He did play-by-play throughout part of his career as well. So just a shame here what's going on, and Pedro ultimately passing away. So rest in peace, Pedro. Hopefully, you find your way up to heaven and everything is better now for you. But just a sad day for baseball here over the course of the past couple of days with Pedro Gomez passing away. But Transitioning now into the signings and rumors taking place across Major League Baseball. There were only a handful here over the past couple of days. I will say the ones I report on here are typically Major League level contracts. There have been a ton of minor league contracts signed over the past couple of days. Steve Cishek to the Astros, a number of other pitchers being signed to minor league level deals. So I would implore you guys, whichever ball club you're a fan of out there, give it a Google. Cardinals minor league deals, Phillies minor league deals, Dodgers minor league deals, whatever it is, whatever market you're in, check those out, because there are a handful of those that are coming around that basically, hey, if they make the ball club, they could make $2 to $3 million, but only getting a minor league deal with an invite to Major League spring training. So Phil Gosselin, I believe, signed with the Angels on a minor league deal after his time in Philadelphia. Phil, a great guy. I played against Phil in college when he was at Virginia, and we were at Lehigh. So go back a little bit with Phil, and one of my teammates played with him in high school, so I certainly wish him the best. And he was fun to watch here in a Phillies uniform. He's bounced around Mets, Braves, now with the Angels. But do yourself a favor, check out those minor league deals that have been signed, and ultimately there's going to be a handful of names that you may have missed throughout the transaction period here in the past couple of weeks. But on the Major League level, the first one we'll start with is Yadier Molina. He is officially back with the St. Louis Cardinals. He signed a 1-year, $9 million deal. There are a few incentives that could take him up to $10 million, but that's a nice deal for Yadier. $9 to $10 million on the higher level when it comes to yearly average annual value for the catcher's position. He came out quoted as saying he always wanted to go back to St. Louis. He did enjoy the free agency process, seeing what else is available out there, but certainly wanted to spend the entirety of his career with the Cardinals, and he's going to be able to do that. So the Cardinals bring back Adam Wainwright, Yadier Molina. They add Nolan Arenado, and they've been busy here over the past week trying to fortify themselves as the team to beat in the NL Central moving forward. Another deal that was signed, this one is not a free agent, but actually avoiding arbitration. Shohei Ohtani and the LA Angels came together for a 2-year, $8.5 million deal. This will avoid arbitration both this year and next year. So a bit of a longer-term deal, but it gives some stability to both Ohtani as well as the Angels, depending on how Shohei performs this year. I think that could be a bit of a steal. If he performs and he is healthy this year, both on the mound as well as the DH, depending on how exactly they look to utilize his talents moving forward, $4.5 million a year is really a steal for a guy who could go both ways and benefit the ball club both on the mound and at the plate. So it was nice to see them come together, avoid arbitration. That way they don't have to go to court and basically yell at each other as to reasons why the other side is wrong in this particular case and you're due a certain amount of money. So Ohtani and the Angels come together to avoid arbitration. You also have the Mets, who signed Jonathan Villar to a 1-year, $3.5 million deal. They signed Almora Jr. last week to be their rotational center fielder. Now they bring in Villar to help them in the infield, kind of be that guy off the bench, potentially every day at second base, based on how he performs. Of course, you got Lindor at shortstop this year, so nice to have Villar as a backup coming over from the Orioles and getting with a winning ball club. So Villar gets a chance to compete, as well as $3.5 million for the upcoming season. But the Mets are filling in the pieces. I don't think they have any big moves left in them. I do think we'll maybe see another 1 or 2 year agreement potentially being signed for New York, but they certainly turned their attention elsewhere quickly after Trevor Bauer decided to go to the Dodgers and spurn the Mets in New York. Next on the list, we have Adam Duvall. Adam Duvall, formerly of the Atlanta Braves. He signed a 1-year, $5 million deal with the Marlins. Duvall was second on the team in Atlanta last year in home runs, so he brings a bit of pop to that Marlins lineup from the right side. Now, is he an everyday guy? Is he going to be able to live up to that billing here once again this year? That is to be determined, but again, Duvall finds himself a major league contract. He stays in the NL East where he is comfortable facing those opposing teams' pitching. He's had success, so the Marlins add a bit of pop to the middle of their lineup by signing Duvall to a 1-year contract. Next up, we have Jake McGee, a relief pitcher who signs with the San Francisco Giants. He signed a 2-year, $7 million agreement. He comes over from a division rival in the NL West to continue to help San Francisco with their rebuild project or process. They surprised some guys last year, finishing right around 500. Had an opportunity to make the playoffs during the last weekend of the regular season. Ultimately fell short, and I like the addition to the bullpen because I think their starting rotation leaves a little bit to be desired. Gabe Kapler there, very much into analytics, sabermetrics. That entire organization is welcoming the future. So I think the more bullpen they have, the more longevity they have in the bullpen will help them ultimately be successful over the course of 162. And McGee at $3.5 million a year is a nice signing for them out there by the Bay. Lastly, we have a trade. We had Aaron Sledgers go from the Tampa Bay Rays out to the LA Angels. The big relief pitcher stands, I think, 6'10", one of the tallest guys out there in Major League Baseball, if I remember correctly. So he moves on from Tampa Bay as they continue to kind of retool and rebuild their organization for that next push that they have coming up here. And the Rays are getting back a player to be named later. So the PTBNL going back to Tampa Bay, and a bit of a salary dump and just opening up a 40-man roster spot for some potential moves down there to be made in Tampa Bay. But the Angels get a piece in the bullpen. They continue to add to that pitching staff out there. So trying to compete in the AL West, which is relatively wide open this year. They're working to bring back Ohtani, bring in Sledgers, and try to compete here moving forward. So those were the deals that were completed. When it comes to the rumors, there haven't been many here over the past couple of days. The biggest one potentially involving the Red Sox and the Japanese right-hander Hirokazu Sawamura. Sawamura was the relief pitcher who I talked about last episode. He's got a 2.77 career ERA over 9 seasons. The Red Sox have made progress on a deal. It is rumored to be a major league level deal in order to bring him over here to the States. I think it'll probably be in that 2-year range. I don't think he's going to want to come over for 1 year kind of prove-it opportunity. So 2 to 3 years potentially for Sawamura. And, Boston seems to be the team to beat in those sweepstakes as he posted a 1.71 ERA over 22 relief appearances last year. Certainly looks like he could be a bit of an upgrade to that bullpen there in Boston. So the only other gentleman we have, of course, Marwin Gonzalez we talked about last episode. A ton of teams are in on him as a utility man. You can add the Blue Jays to that list. The Mets have been rumored. The Phillies have been rumored. Again, there's upwards of 7 to 10 teams kind of checking in on his market to see where his price range comes in at. And then lastly, we have the Mets, who are apparently now interested in Justin Turner to be their third baseman. So according to Ken Rosenthal, they are still, quote, far apart on money and years, but they have had initial conversations with Turner. And then the Brewers seem to be the team to beat after the Dodgers added Bauer. I don't think they're going to be looking at $20 million a year to bring back Turner. So the Brewers are the team to beat for Turner's services, but the Mets have thrown their hat in the ring there as well as a team to watch over the coming days. But that'll do it here for segment number 2 of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll step aside here for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows, but when we come back, we'll continue around the league preview and prediction time. Now we're over to the National League here. We're going to start out west in segment number 3. I know you guys know it's a 2-team race, but come on back. I'll let you know who's going to win the division and how the rest of the teams are going to stack up. So I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We're going to step aside here, but we'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello again, and thanks for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. If you guys haven't checked us out on social media, do yourself a favor, do myself a favor. Head to Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and follow both the GSMC Baseball Podcast as well as the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll keep you guys up to date on Twitter of everything going on out there, all the latest signings, articles, news breaks that are happening across baseball. And then the podcast network on LinkedIn will let you guys know when all the latest episodes are available, as well as where to find us, how to get there, and all that good stuff that goes along with social media. So give us a follow, review, subscribe, whatever it is from that platform. We certainly appreciate it here moving forward. But transitioning now into the back half of today's episode, we're going to continue my preview and predictions around Major League Baseball. Once again, we are about a week away from spring training, so now I think it's finally time to start to get into that 2021 talk and give some previews. Like I mentioned last year, I had the White Sox and Reds being the surprise teams in both leagues. Both of them hit for me this year. So far in the American League, I kind of have the Mariners as that team to watch. Or, they're really kind of the only outside one. In the Central there, of course, you got Cleveland, Minnesota, Chicago. In the East, you got the Yankees, Rays, Blue Jays maybe are a team you can qualify as to somebody that will surprise. And then out West, like I mentioned, I got the Mariners as the team that surprises. So let's jump over now to the National League. We're going to follow the same format here, starting out with the National League West, rotating until we get out East, and then I'll finally give you guys my playoff preview here in the upcoming weeks before we get underway. But jumping into the NL West, unfortunately for you Colorado Rockies fans, you fans out there in the Denver area, it's going to be a long summer for those boys. The Rockies could potentially be the worst team in all of baseball. They're going to have some competition with a team we'll discuss in segment 4 here. But, truly, I don't think the Rockies really have a chance of contending. I think they've officially entered their rebuild. Of course, everybody knows the Nolan Arenado trade that took place. Trevor Story could be available during the middle of the year. With him being a pending free agent, I do think the Rockies, after a month or two, when they find themselves in the basement, are going to look to move him to try to get something back and flip him to a contender. But the Rockies rotation with Germain Marquis, Kyle Freeland, Antonio Santana, John Gray, Gomber, there's a handful of numbers here. So there will be a battle when it comes to spring training in regards to who will be the 5 in the rotation for the Rockies. A lot of younger guys here on this list trying to make their way up and coming, so it'll be fascinating to see how that pans out. In the bullpen, you got Daniel Bard, Scott Oberg, Yency Almonte, Tyler Kinley leading the way there, but none of those guys are household names or are really any difference makers when it comes to the 2021 season. And, playing in Denver in that yard where the ball flies, I think there could be a lot of runs scored against the Rockies in their home ballpark. When it comes to around the horn, you got Diaz behind the dish, Fuentes at first base, Rogers there at second. Third base is now up for grabs. Ryan McMahon, Garrett Hampson potentially filling in. Really the only guys to write home about here are some of the outfielders. You got Trevor Story at shortstop, who of course I mentioned, but Ian Desmond out in left field, solid ball player out there. Of course, Charlie Blackmon out in right field. He continued to stroke it last year. There was a time where he was up around the 400 mark. And then out in center field, you got Tapia or Hampson filling in there, Hilliard going for it. And then in the DH role when they get over to the American League, Tapia looks to be that guy unless they move Blackman or Desmond and go with more defense out there in the outfield. But this team across the board, unfortunately, I think maybe one of the worst in all of Major League Baseball. And going against the Padres and Dodgers a bunch of times certainly isn't going to help where they finish in the standings. So the fourth place team here I have is the Arizona Diamondbacks. There are a few projections out there that are higher on the Diamondbacks than I am, but unfortunately, I just don't see it happening. Madison Bumgarner, he's out there still after signing that 5-year deal. I think he is on the decline a bit. I did not like that contract when it was originally signed, so I probably won't like it here for the duration. You have Zach Gallen, Luke Weaver, Caleb Smith, also in the rotation. Solid arms, but not spectacular. Looking at the bullpen, they made a couple of moves. Joakim Soria recently signed as a free agent, so they're trying to fortify the bullpen. You have Stephen Crichton out there who has got closing experience as well. Riley Smith, Travis Bergen, Yohan Lopez out there trying to close games. But again, on paper, I do not like that bullpen when it comes to the offenses across this division. Offensively for the Diamondbacks, not a ton to write home about here as well. Of course, they got a few solid players, but going around, Carson Kelly behind the dish, Christian Walker at first base, Stephen Voigt out there as well, could potentially get some time. You got Ketel Marte at second, who's a solid ball player. Eduardo Escobar, who's a solid player at third base over there. Shortstop, Nick Ahmed. You got Peralta in left. Varsho in center, and Cole Calhoun in right field, who hit well for them last year after coming over from the Angels. But again, on paper, I just don't see this ball club being able to compete with really anybody outside of the Rockies, and potentially the third-place team coming up, who I have, is the San Francisco Giants. Now, the Giants continue to rebuild this offseason. Last year, they surprised some people, like I mentioned, finishing just under 500, but having the chance to make the playoffs if they would have just won a game or two the final weekend of the year. A lot of people had them at the lowest point in this division, but Gabe Kapler and the boys out there have them trending in the right direction. And, Gabe Kapler, it turns out, wasn't the problem in Philadelphia, but his personality with the blue-collar city of Philadelphia did not jive, and he was essentially the fall guy for all the problems within the organization. I mean, GM Matt Klentak has since moved on, so, Kapler found himself an opportunity not long after, and he did a very nice job last year making these guys contenders and up for a playoff spot. But the rotation out there, Johnny Cueto still around, still throwing it. They re-signed Kevin Gausman to the qualifying offer, brought him back. Added Anthony DeScaffiani to the rotation, Alex Wood out there. So a solid 1 through 4, if not spectacular. Once again, with the other rotations here in the division, it's tough to compare this style of rotation to that one, but I do like names on the list there. They also have Tyler Rogers out in the bullpen, Caleb Beauregard, Jarlin Garcia, Trevor Gott out there, Wandy Peralta still throwing it around. So it's a decent bullpen for the Giants. I do think that is one area of concern. I would put their rotation just ahead of the bullpen when it comes to ultimately making moves, but I do like that on paper. And then when you bounce around here, Joey Bart could make his debut behind the dish. Former top prospect out of Georgia Tech. I'll be fascinated to see how he translates into the big leagues. I think he has a shot to be a solid offensive catcher if he continues to develop. Brandon Belt at first base, left-handed hitter there, very solid player, continues to contribute. I think he has another solid season this year. Donovan Solano was one of the big surprises last year at second base. They also signed Tommy La Stella to potentially fill into this spot earlier in the offseason, adding him to add some offensive capability. Brandon Crawford at shortstop, everybody knows is fantastic. He continues to man that spot. Evan Longoria at third base. He could be rotating with La Stella as well, who added some depth to the infield. So a very nice infield there of Belt, Solano, La Stella, Longoria, and Crawford. 4 out of those 5 guys is going to give them a nice little infield piece there. Now you get to the outfield. Let's see here. You got Yastrzemski out in right field. who was in MVP conversation last year. So if he continues to progress and develop, he could be a solid outfield piece for them. Over in left field, you have Alex Dickerson. And out in center, you have Marciano Dubon out there. So Yastrzemski was certainly a surprise out in right field. And I think he could continue to develop and be a nice piece. So that's why I have the Giants ahead of the Diamondbacks when it comes to the division. But ultimately, it's a race between those two teams for third and fourth place because everybody knows what's going on at the top of the division. Everybody knows what's happened this offseason, both with the Dodgers and Padres. So which one's ultimately going to finish first? And I had the Padres ahead of the Dodgers up until 72 hours ago with the Trevor Bauer signing. So your second-place team potentially still winning over 100 games. I have the San Diego Padres. And this rotation of Darvish, Snell, Musgrove, then you have Lament and Paddock, of course, because Clevinger will be out this year with arm trouble. So I think if he was healthy, you could honestly have a much deeper, detailed debate as to who's going to finish first here. So I like those rotation 4 or 5 deep there. That'll certainly help. The bullpen now could be the weakness of this team, and it's honestly still a pretty solid bullpen. You got Drew Pomeranz as the closer. Emilio Pagan has closing experience. But below those two, a lot of names that you're hoping to develop and continue to perform at the levels that they did in years past. You got Matt Strahm, Pierce Johnson, Dan Altavilla, Tim Hill, Craig Strawman, a lot of guys out there, Jose Castillo, who have showed things in the past. But again, those names on paper just are a bit, lower level than at least the rotation. Now, with guys going deep in games in the rotation, maybe you don't have to use as many bullpen arms over the course of 162. But again, I think that is the only weakness I see. And when I say weakness, still a strength compared to some other teams. But on this team, it's the weakest unit, in my opinion. At catcher, we have Austin Nola, continues to develop for them, a really solid guy behind the dish. Of course, you got Eric Hosmer at first base, continues to rake on that contract. Jake Cronenworth at second base, as well as Ha-Seong Kim at second. I mean, Cronenworth was up for Rookie of the Year, but Kim performed fantastically over there in Korea. So if Kim doesn't translate to America, maybe Cronenworth will get back to everyday reps, but I think that's Kim's job to lose based on what they're paying him there at second base. Everybody knows Fernando Tatis Jr. at shortstop, the next great shortstop in baseball. Is he going to get paid $300 million? Where's that contract coming in? And then Manny Machado there at third base. So 5 deep here in the infield with Tatis, Machado, Kim, Cronenworth, and then Hosmer allows them to move some guys around, give some off days out there, and keep everybody fresh when it comes to the offensive lineup. And then in the outfield, Tommy Pham out in left field, Trent Grisham in center, and Will Myers in right field. A fantastic, depth there as well, with Profar out there potentially being the DH when they get to the American League. Jorge Mateo can play multiple spots for him in the outfield. So the Padres, I have them as potentially the second best team in the entire National League, but somehow the second best team in the NL West. And, health will be a big determining factor between teams 1 and 2 here in the National League West. If the rotations are able to stay healthy, it'll be a fascinating race to watch the Padres and then, of course, your world champion Dodgers go at it here. But the Dodgers, I still have them as the team to beat. I predict that they'll win their 9th straight Western Division crown. Of course, Clayton Kershaw in the rotation. You'll have David Price back from his year off due to coronavirus. They recently added Trevor Bauer, and you have Walker Buehler. So those are your top 4 there. You're filling in number 5 with May, Urias, and Gosselin. Whichever one of those guys is performing at the time or whichever matchup is most in your favor. So I think that'll be a fascinating kind of depth piece to watch. Ultimately, who is that number 5? Or do they go by committee? Do they go May to Urias like they did in some playoff games? Or, Gosselin, use all 3 of them in that spot out of the rotation? You then go to the bullpen where the top guys, Kenley Jansen is still around as closer 1 more year. Even though his velocity is dipping here in just a little bit, he continues to have success in that role for the Dodgers. You got Blake Treinen, who was recently signed this offseason, filling in 7th, 8th inning role. Brudsar Gratterall, 100 miles an hour plus late in the games. Everybody loved watching him in the playoffs. You got Dylan Florio as well, Victor Gonzalez, Joe Kelly, not to mention still in the bullpen, Tommy Cannell out there who is signed. So I like a lot of these guys in the bullpen for LA. I think that's the difference between the Dodgers and the Padres right now is the depth in that bullpen. And then the offense, of course, continues to be solid for the Dodgers. Will Smith behind the dish, Max Muncy back at first base. Over at second base, you got Gavin Lux coming off of his rookie year. He should continue to improve and develop. Third base is really the only weakness for this team. Like we mentioned, still involved potentially in Justin Turner, but I don't see him returning to L.A., so it looks like it'll be Edwin Rios' job to lose there at third. Corey Seager at shortstop for one more year. Then the outfield, of course, of A.J. Pollock, Chris Taylor out in left field potentially, Cody Bellinger in center, and Mookie Betts out there in right field. So I don't see any weakness on this team outside of third base, as opposed to where the Padres bullpen, I feel, is still a weaker unit, comparatively speaking, to the Dodgers here. So wrapping things up, again, I got the Rockies in fifth place, potentially being the worst team in the National League. I have the Diamondbacks in the fourth place spot, being beat out just barely by the San Francisco Giants. I think the Giants continue to trend upward, while Arizona's trending downward, in my opinion. And then, of course, a coin flip between the Padres and Dodgers, but I give the advantage to the Dodgers just due to the depth of their bullpen. If everybody stays healthy and all things considered, I think the Dodgers are still the team to beat there in the National League West. So what do you guys think out there? Let me know in the comments. Am I off on the Giants, Diamondbacks? But I only see one out of the wild card teams coming from this division, so both the Padres and Dodgers making the playoffs, but I think the Giants and or Diamondbacks would fall just short if this were the case here. So that'll do it for the third segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll step aside here one last time for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows, but when we come back, let's talk about the National League Central. Let's wrap things up there. We'll be right back, everyone. Stick with us.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome into the fourth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Let's jump right into it here. We just got done wrapping up the NL West preview, where I think the Dodgers are going to outlast the Padres due to the depth of that bullpen. We're transitioning now to the NL Central, and honestly, I think this is the toughest division to predict. I think all of these teams are kind of jumbled up together in a big bunch. I really don't see any favorite when it comes to these units. Potentially, I think the top team that I have is the team to beat, but I still see them only winning 85 to 90 games, and potentially 3 out of the 5 teams, maybe even 4 out of the 5, finishing under 500. And a lot of this is going to have to go off with how the teams start the season, because whether it's the Cubs, Brewers, Reds, Pirates, we know, even the Cardinals, whoever is really struggling by the month of June and into July, I think is going to hit sell mode when it comes to the trade deadline. There are a lot of guys within these teams who are potential free agents, as well as good performers who could return. A nice little prospect list in regards to being moved. So a lot of this could depend on how these teams start and what they do at the trade deadline. I mean, the Cubs, if they struggle, could move on from a ton of guys. Same with the Brewers, even the Reds. But vice versa, if they get off to a hot start, potentially they look to add at the deadline because they see that nobody has really separated themselves in this division, and it really could be had by anybody. I mean, 4 out of these 5 teams, if they win this division, maybe I'd be a bit surprised, but, I can't say it would be out of nowhere. And the one team where the conversation isn't going to be had is the Pittsburgh Pirates. This is the team, along with the Colorado Rockies, that I think could be fighting for the number 1 overall draft pick when it comes to the 2022 draft in regards to, the worst team in all of baseball. So I think they are just going to struggle this year. We've seen them move a ton of guys out of town, trades with the Yankees, Padres, Nationals, moving top guys as they are clearly in rebuild mode moving forward here. So I have them finishing 5th. Their rotation, Mitch Keller, Chad Kuhl, Stephen Brault, JT Brubaker, Cody Ponce. A lot of those guys you've probably never even heard of out there. They moved Towson as well as Musgrove, the 2 guys you had heard of from their rotation. So a lot of kids are going to get an opportunity here. Expect them to struggle moving forward. Not much better out there in the bullpen. Richard Rodriguez, Chris Stratton, Kyle Crick, Michael Felice, Clay Holmes out there. Austin Davis, he's formerly of the Phillies. He struggled from the left side. So it's going to be a long summer at PNC Park. Thank goodness it's probably the most beautiful park across Major League Baseball, and you still have a reason to go out to see the team just to experience the ballpark, but you're really not going to have to pay a ton of attention to what's going on out there on the field because guys are have been moved or will be moved if they're performing out there in Pittsburgh. Behind the dish, Jacob Stallings, first baseman Colin Moran, Adam Frazier at second. You got Kevin Newman at short, Cabrian Hayes at third, an outfield of Reynolds, Alford, and Polanco. These are just names, again, that, if I handed you a piece of paper and said, hey, name 3 Pirates players, the 3 guys you would know were traded this offseason. So it's going to be a cast of nobodies, the Bad News Bears potentially out there in Pittsburgh, and long summer once again for the Pirates when it comes to Major League Baseball. But these next 4 teams, again, if you guys want to comment and let me know how you think they finish, I believe there could be an argument made for each one of these teams potentially winning this division. So I went back and forth in regards to how I think they're going to finish. A lot of it is due to health. Again, the start of the season, whether or not they become buyers or sellers at the deadline. But in 4th place, I'm going with the Milwaukee Brewers. I just looked at the starting rotation. You got Woodruff, who's solid, Burns, Hausner, Lindblom. I don't like the depth there. Now, the bullpen on the other side of things, they got 2 of the best arms in Major League Baseball. Josh Hader, fantastic from the left side. Again, he could be had in a trade if things are going south here. Devin Williams, Rookie of the Year, throwing that changeup airbender screwball, probably the most disgusting pitch in all of baseball last year. He should continue to perform for them. Outside of those 2, you got Suter, Peralta, Yardley, but I just think with this rotation, they're going to be behind in too many games for Williams and Hader to really have an effect. Now, I think if they have the lead heading into innings 7, 8, 9, it's going to be tough to come back and beat these guys, but I just don't know how often that is going to happen, especially with the offense leaving a little bit to be desired, in my opinion. You got Omar Narvaez behind the dish, Hiura over there at first base. They did sign Colton Wong at second base, who is a solid Major League player, so they added him to the offense to bring some pop. You have Urias at third base. Maybe Justin Turner, if he's added, could potentially shake up these standings. But as of now, he is still a free agent. You have Arcia at shortstop, who is solid. Christian Yelich is going to need to bounce back and get back to his MVP caliber. He was a big reason why the Brewers struggled as a team last year, as he struggled individually. Then in center field, you got Lorenzo Cain. You got Valcia Garcia out in right field. So if Yelich gets back to his MVP performance, potentially they could get up to that 2 or 3 spot. But if he struggles again, this team is certainly going to finish 4th here. So I like Yelich. I like the bullpen. But a lot else left to be desired when it comes to the Brewers and the rest of their squad. 3rd place here, I'm going with the Cincinnati Reds. These guys were my surprise team last year, but unfortunately, after moving on from Bauer, cutting additional money. I think they're going to take a step back here in 2021. Yes, the rotation could be solid with Gray, Castillo, Wade Miley, Tyler Mahle, Hoffman. I like Gray and Castillo at the top, but again, Sonny Gray may be able to be had in a trade if the Reds struggle through the first couple of months in the season. The bullpen with Amir Garrett, they're going to look internally to replace the closer position. I like Garrett's attitude, his moxie, his swag out there on the mound. He's a solid guy from the left side. Lucas Sims, Tehe Antani, Michael Lorenzen is a solid arm out of the bullpen, as well as offensively, a bit of a two-way guy there. So the bullpen leaves a little bit to be desired, but the top guys, once again, very solid. Offensively, they are a bit better than the Brewers, in my opinion. You have Tucker Barnhart behind the dish, Joey Votto at first base, Mike Moustakas potentially playing second base for them, moving over from the hot corner, where Edwino Suarez continues to call that home. If he has another solid year offensively, this could be a nice infield. Jose Garcia holding down shortstop for them. Out in the outfield, you could have some moving pieces. You have Nick Castellanos out in right field. Jesse Winkler could be sprinkled into left field or center field. Nick Senzel has center field pretty much every day, so Winkler out in left, or Akiyama potentially out there. So this ball club isn't bad. Like I mentioned, they were my surprise team, but losing Bauer, shipping out some other guys for cost, is really just setting them back, in my opinion, and I think they're going to finish third in this division, but you could see them as high as second if they stay healthy and that rotation performs the way they could. So second place this year, I'm going with the Chicago Cubs. Maybe they should be third or fourth, but I just think offensively against the rotations in this division, they're going to find themselves having success. Their own rotation, of course, took a hit this offseason, moving Darvish, now being led by Kyle Hendricks, Zach Davies, who they got back from the Padres. You have Alex Mills, Trevor Williams, who they recently signed here. So a solid 1, 2, 3. Not spectacular, nothing like the Padres or Dodgers, but still a solid rotation at the top of the list for these guys, including Hendricks, who continues to dazzle, a former Ivy League guy. I always root for him. Out in the bullpen, you still have Craig Kimbrell. He's had his ups and downs there in Chicago, but if he comes out and is very good, you're going to have a top-of-the-line closer if you're a Cubs fan. Below him, there could be some holes and, a lot left to desire. Andrew Chaffin has been brought in out there for the bullpen. You got Roman Wick, Brad Wieck, Dan Winkler out there. So, again, the pitching staff not great anymore out there in Chicago, but offensively, this is where I think they could just out-hit teams because, again, rotations in Cleveland, good at the top, Cincinnati, good at the top, but Pittsburgh, Milwaukee leave a lot to be desired. So Wilson Contreras, if he sticks around in Chicago, obviously he's been rumored to be headed out in trades. You have Austin Romine potentially filling in behind the dish. First base, Anthony Rizzo continues to call it home. Second base, you got Nico Hoyner, who's performed well. David Bote out there could get some games. Third base, Chris Bryant. He will obviously be a key piece as to what happens for the Cubbies this year. If he performs well, but the team is struggling, he could be shipped out of town. Or does he continue to struggle like he did last year, similar to Christian Yelich? Both of those guys were down around the 200 mark. I mean, Bryant, a former MVP, Yelich, a former MVP, but both of those guys just couldn't get it going over the course of 60 games. And if they both pick it up, that would be a huge benefit to their ball clubs. You also have Javier Baez at the shortstop spot, one of the best in the game. He continues to be electric. They signed Jock Peterson to play left field for them to replace Kyle Schwarber. Almost an apples for apples trade there. When you look at what you got out of those guys, left-handed hitters who struggle against left-handed pitchers, feast on right-handers. Some of the other guys in the division are mainly right-handed at the top of the rotation. So I like Peterson, and a bit cheaper than Schwarber, a bit more athletic. He could be a slight upgrade there. You have Ian Happ out in center field, and then Jason Hayward over in right field. So the outfield is solid. Like I said, not a lot of holes offensively for this team. Second base, probably their weakest unit. And then when it comes to the bullpen and the rotation, I just like Chicago's offense being able to differentiate themselves from the Brewers and Reds here moving forward. But my team to beat, some people have them finishing third still, fourth in the, according to some projections, but I like the St. Louis Cardinals. And obviously this has a lot to do with the recent addition of Nolan Arenado. But the top end of the rotation, Jack Flaherty coming back. They re-sign Adam Wainwright. The old statesman there continues to throw. Mike Mikolas, Kwang Hyun Kim, solid. Ponce de Leon was good for them down the stretch last year and into the playoffs. Carlos Martinez showed some good things. So I like the top of that with Flaherty, Wainwright, Ponce de Leon, Hyun Kim. I think they have the best rotation in this division, which again I think gives them the advantage to finish in first place if everybody remains healthy. Now the bullpen is not full of top-end names, and this could be the weakest unit on the team. You got Ryan Hazley potentially closing, John Grant, Alex Reyes, Cabrera, Woodford, Eldridge, Fernandez, Andrew Miller. Everybody knows from the left side, if he can get back to his old ways, being that shutdown guy, middle reliever being used whenever they need him in regards to getting a big out throughout the course of the game. So I like the rotation. I'm not huge on the bullpen, but I like the bullpen. But offensively, we just said bringing back Yadier Molina behind the dish, I think is going to be huge for this rotation and the bullpen. The comfortability they have with throwing to Molina. Obviously, the guy's still one of the best behind the dish there. Paul Goldschmidt still at first base, raking for them offensively. Tommy Edman, it's his time to shine here at second base since they moved on from Colton Wong. But I think Edman is going to be a solid player for them. Third base, we mentioned Nolan Arenado will get the nod over there. So what becomes now of Matt Carpenter? Ultimately, what do they do with Carpenter, who's been fantastic, former World Series MVP, but does seem to be slowing down here a little bit? He kind of becomes a rotational piece for them, a pinch hitter or a piece off the bench, because at shortstop you have Paul DeJong, who's solid there. Edman could play a little bit of short too if they want to put Carpenter at second base and kind of rotate pieces up the middle. In the outfield, you have Tyler O'Neill as the name penciled into left field, center field Harrison Bader, and then right field Dylan Carlson, who was a big prospect recently when it comes to Major League Baseball, now filling in every day there in right field. So, Goldschmidt, Arenado in the middle of that lineup, Yadier Molina back for that lineup, DeJong I like at shortstop. So I have the Cardinals currently as the favorite in the NL Central and the team to beat. But teams 2 through 4, I think could go any direction. Like I said, the Pirates, use a pen, right? Not even a pencil. Put them in at number 5. The Reds, Brewers, and Cubs could probably finish anywhere from 2nd to 4th. And then I like the Cardinals, if everybody stays healthy, as really the team to beat there. And, the only playoff team coming out of this division, in my opinion. But we'll get to my playoff preview and predictions in some upcoming episodes. So we got the Cardinals in the NL Central, the Padres, Dodgers going at it out west. To wrap up our previews here. But thanks for listening to today's episode, everybody. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We talked about the new baseball for 2021, how they're going to remove a bit of bounciness, try to keep it in the yard a bit more. The MLB, MLBPA agreed to COVID protocols and safety. 7-inning doubleheaders, runners on second base for extra innings were the big ones. Then Pedro Gomez unexpectedly passed away. Rest in peace to Gomez. Prayers and condolences out to his family. Major League Baseball set up a code of conduct hotline for women reporters to call in if they ever feel uncomfortable. And then, of course, the signings across Major League Baseball were no huge names signed, but teams continue to fill in and round out their rosters as we are now less than a week away from spring training. In about 2 weeks, we'll have some baseball to discuss with you guys, how the pitchers are looking, how everybody's doing out there. But until that point, check us out on social media. Like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. I appreciate you guys tuning in once again here today. That'll do it for today's show. Hopefully you guys have a great weekend out there. Enjoy yourselves. Continue to stay safe. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always. I'll talk to you guys again on Monday. Enjoy the weekend, everyone.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.